got this.
Okay. So, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for bearing with us for this last session of the day. I hope you're not too tired yet at this point. We're going to make it as refreshing as possible. Just a few quick things. We would like to thank the Diamond sponsors for their support and the Okinawa Congress technical support. So I was going to explain the system with the green and the orange and red lights, but as the only two presenters live here will be the moderators, I don't think it's needed to explain because we know how it works. Also for online questions, please put your questions in the Zoom chat. And after the session, you can proceed in the Oxford abstracts chat. So this session is about harmonization of invasive alien species management data, moderated by myself and Donna Lewis, which is actually the first speaker. So I'm inviting Donna here for her presentation about harmonizing terminology and records of plant and patient status across federally managed countries.
Thanks, Lynn. So I actually work with the Terrestrial Ecosystem Research Network, which is enabled by the National Collaborative Research Infrastructure Strategy. And I'm presenting on behalf of IRE today and as co-author of this work. So using Australia as a bit of a test case for this and harmonising terminology and plant invasion status in Australia. So we didn't really plan this study. IRE was trying to, looking at studying the difference between functional syndromes of native and alien species across Australian vegetation types. And she also wanted to explore co-occurrence patterns between native and alien species. But she found this impossible because there was no consistent list for introduced species for Australia. It was only by state and territory. So she decided to take on this enormous task of combining existing data. So just to give you some context about Australia, it's a biodiversity hotspot and it's the second highest number of endemic plant species. 85% of the Australian flora is endemic. It's a megadiverse country and biological invasions are a major threat. So over 13 billion is spent annually for biosecurity. So a definition, what is invasive alien species? So they're species introduced outside of their native range and they have become successfully established and cause substantial impacts to the environment. Another definition by the IUCN, invasive alien species are animals or plants or other organisms that are introduced by humans intentionally or accidentally outside of their native range, and they negatively impact native biodiversity. So while IRE was doing this work, she recognised that there was various frameworks for biological invasions, including Richardson. So she's come up with some really colourful diagrams here to illustrate the frameworks, and they all vary slightly or significantly. And then, of course, there's the IUCN and CBD, and then Blackburn, and, of course, Darwin Core, which follows Blackburn. So the negative impacts, they were developed by the IUCN, and these impacts include environmental impact classification and socio-economic impact classification. So when we look at this diagrammatically, based on the IUCN, we have a magnitude of impact. So the harmful impacts are at the top here, which are regarded as those species that are invasive. Also, more recently, the Global Register for Introduced and Invasive Species. So from this point forward, I'll refer to as the GRIS. So what is exactly native range? And I just wanted to provide this example for you all and how we delimit it. So using the common carp as an example. So in Bulgaria, the common carp is regarded as native, whereas in Romania, it is regarded as alien. So depending on what side of the river the carp is swimming on, it could be native or it could be alien. So that presents quite a predicament. So the harmonised framework. This is a framework that IRE came up with as she was working through this process using the Australian data sets as an example. So we've referred to this as the Alien Flora of Australia framework. So to undertake this work, we had to obtain 8 independent data sources at the state and territory level. So I'm just going to flick through these next couple of slides to show you the differences in the terminologies used for introduced status. So in the Northern Territory, downloaded from the Northern Territory Flora, we use introduced to NT. In Western Australia, obtained by Florabase, using alien and mixed. In South Australia, introduced is denoted by an asterisk. In Victoria, Victoria follows Darwin Core, establishment means and degree of establishment. In Tasmania, we've got a whole range of other symbols here used for introduced and naturalised, sparingly naturalised, doubtfully naturalised, and also in the ACT, Australian Capital Territory, based on origin, exotic, Indigenous, exotic. So you get my point about a whole range of terminologies are used. New South Wales, natural, introduced, native colonising, the census of Queensland, naturalised, formally naturalised, doubtfully naturalised. And then of course there's the Australian plant census, which is the authoritative list for vascular plants in Australia. And the information is provided to the APC on a state-by-state basis. So when we look at this table in the APC for distribution, all of the information is concatenated into the one field. So for each state, it has in brackets whether it's naturalised or doubtfully naturalised or any of those other terms used. And then of course at the global level, the GRIS, there's a range of tables in the GRIS as well. So establishment means whether it's alien and invasive. So the workflow that we use to combine all of these data sets and harmonise them, we obtained all of the data sources. So the APC, so the national level, and then the state level, and then of course the GRIS. Obtaining all the state and territory level censuses was a bit of an undertaking too. Some of them were accessible and downloadable online. Others we had to directly contact the herbarium to obtain. And then sometimes they weren't current as of that date in time. Some of them were current, 2015, etc. Then we went through a process of curation. So standardising the taxonomy and the terminology in invasion ecology. We matched introduced status between the state censuses and the national plant census. Then we unified the status at the state level, and then we integrated the national status and cross-referenced it with the GRIS. We unified status at the national scale. So we compared the status, we detected the mismatches, and we assigned status for Australia. So then we came up with these data sets. So the data sets are available in Figshare. And there's an R script as well. So the whole process is repeatable. So standardising the state and territory data sources, because they were in a range of separate tables for each census, what we did as part of the process was pulled it all into the one table. So that included the state name, the canonical name, and the alien status that was harmonised. And then the Australian plant census, we excluded supragenus and then we split species distribution column by column for each state. So rather than having it all concatenated in the one field, we parsed it out into the separate states. That made it a much more workable product. And then, of course, with the GRIS, we merged the Australian GRIS data sets into one and standardised the introduction status terminology. So we used this prioritisation procedure at the state and territory level. And this is a procedure we used to generate the data set for the state levels. So we use quite a conservative status. So when we look at the native status, we've actually used Darwin Core here. Establishment means native, and then anything that was naturalised, doubtfully naturalised, and all of those other terms that we used, introduced according to Darwin Core establishment means. And then we end up with this data set. So we've actually generated data sets at the state level, but we've retained the source information from those state censuses. And we do have the alien status at the national level, the comparison, and the Darwin Core. So we're able to identify the mismatches. The mismatches range from 10% of mismatches to 40%. The prioritisation procedure at the national level was in reverse. So when a species at the state level was flagged as being introduced, it automatically was flagged as being introduced at the national level. Once again, we have a national data set, which includes all of the state and territory source information for introduced, APC, the GRIS, the AFA, which is this framework, and then the Darwin Core. So the AFA provides a highly valuable research infrastructure. It's cost effective, it's repeatable with an R script that's available, and can be used across a broad range of stakeholders listed here. So following this product, the generation of this product, which came across not by accident, but as part of another study, the APC has developed an R package workflow now, which makes that data much more workable, and it's called APC Align. Other collaborations include the GRIS. So that GRIS has been updated based on this work and the outputs of this work. We've also been invited to present this work at Environment and Invasives Committee through the Department of Agriculture, Commonwealth Department in Australia, and other research projects such as utilising AFA to generate national listing of declared species in each state and territory, and also at the national scale of weeds of national significance. We've also engaged with the ALA, because the ALA at the same time were generating a non-native species list for Australia. So we're able to compare and work together with our lists. And of course, last but not least, is using all of this information to feed into the TDWG task group on invasive management. So feel free to scan the QR code and add your email if you're interested in engaging with this group, which Lien is going to present at the end of this session. And thanks very much for your time today.
Hello. Okay. Thank you very much for your presentation. Are there any questions from the room? I don't see any questions online.
Great, because I was going to redirect your question to Iris. So if you do think of questions, I didn't actually do the data analysis. I was involved in a number of ways, but if anyone had any further questions about this work, I can certainly pass you on to Ire, the primary author.
Okay, thanks. So I will introduce our next speaker, which is Scott Brown.
I'm Scott Brown with the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration here in the U.S., specifically with the Pacific Islands Fisheries Service. And I'm here today to talk a little bit about our need in the U.S. To represent organism interaction with the ecosystem and with humans, especially in the context of the impact of invasive alien species. So just to give a little background, he's not really going to define invasive species at an invasive species management symposium, is he? Yeah, specifically because I want to talk about one particular aspect, and that aspect isn't the alien aspect. That's pretty much covered by Darwin Core already. It's the impact aspect, that invasive species, by definition, are causing or are likely to cause some kind of harm, some kind of negative impact on their environment or on humans in their environment or nearby. So why do we care about this from an invasive species management perspective? About the ecological, the economic, the geo or hydrological, the epidemiological impact of invasive species. And I want to just assert that measuring and predicting the impact of invasive species is actually a crucial part of invasive species management. And the main reason for this is because this is where all of the oomph comes from, where the motivation comes from, where the money comes from. If you want to go out and manage these things, you need to be able to demonstrate that these things have some kind of impact, with an emphasis on the demonstration. If things don't have an impact, then there's no motivation to actually go out and control these things. So case in point, there's species here in the US that are called cattle egrets. They're pretty much everywhere. They're all over the place. In Florida, you see them in cow fields all the time. They like to hang out around cattle. But they're alien. But there's basically no motivation to actually go out and manage these things, at least in the mainland 48 states. And it's because basically they're not causing any problems. They're not hurting anybody, so nobody is spending any money or making any effort to go out and manage them. On the flip side of that coin, we have hydrilla, which basically everyone is attempting to control and to prevent ending up in their pond, so to speak. Florida specifically is spending $10 million a year just to maintain the status quo. They're not actually eradicating this. They're just keeping it under control at this point. And the reason why everyone is so up in arms about hydrilla is because there's actually lots of impact and lots of evidence of impact that hydrilla causes problems in a lot of different ways that we'll talk about a little bit in the rest of the talk. But before I go into these kind of examples a little bit more, I want to talk a little bit about why the focus on Darwin Core here with invasive species impact. And part of the reason is because that first half, the alien, species half of this problem is actually very much a Darwin Core problem. It's information about taxons and occurrences and organisms and all things Darwin Core. So I think that it's actually, very important to be able to use Darwin Core for that half. The other half of the data might be biodiversity data. It might be something else entirely. But I kind of want to attack the problem of how do we empower the use of Darwin Core specifically, at least for the half that it's good for, while also being able to record these other types of data. So, before I go too deep into this, I want to bring up a few just kind of example cases to lay some context for the sorts of data that are important. And the most obvious one is ecological impact that Darwin Core already kind of handles reasonably well. I have a complaint that I'm going to bring up, but let's just bring this up in context. So white nose syndrome is caused by a fungus, actually. It's from Europe. It arrived in the States some years ago and has been completely decimating bat populations all over the place. There's a couple of species that are actually really having problems and are ending up on endangered species lists because of this invasive fungal pathogen. And what we would like to do is to just be able to record this data. Hey, there's a bat. There's also this fungus. The fungus is infecting the bat. The bat died because of the fungus. These are all very important pieces of information to record and to get a hold on the problem of white nose syndrome in the United States. So here's actually a tool put out by the USGS that maps. It maps a lot of different things, actually, not just white nose syndrome in bats. But this is one of the pieces of data that you can get from here. There's about 366 records that I managed to pull up about white nose syndrome. It has the location, it has the species of bat actually further down the page here that you can't see, but it also records notably that, this mortality and morbidity variable that you can kind of see there very small in the screenshot. And this is actually like super important information with regards to the impact of this pathogen. So I poked around on Darwin Core a little bit. On GBIF, I pulled down all of the occurrences of this pseudo Gymnoascus destructans. And there's actually a few different variables where you might find some information about bats. One of them is called associated occurrences. Sorry that this screenshot of my Jupyter notebook is so small. But there's no data in GBIF that has associated occurrences with it. A lot of the data has associated taxa. For the most part, the associated taxa records which bat species was infected. It does not record whether or not that bat, was dead or dying or what. And it's also not in a very good format generally. A lot of these are just the taxon name. Some of them are the vernacular name. Some of them specify, hey, this was host of or some other thing. So this is not very machine readable at all. Another possible place where we could record this is actually in this resource relationship class that exists in Darwin Core. As far as I know, none of the pseudo-Gymnoascus destructions data has these resource relationships, but these things can point to other occurrences elsewhere that are also in a Darwin Core format. One issue with this is that it's not necessarily easy to go and find those data points. There is a field here that is the related resource ID, and this ID is hopefully some kind of global identifier. But, the global identifier will help if you already have the data in question, but if you don't have the data in question in hand, then where is this data? There's nothing to tell you about that. So these are kind of the pathways that Darwin Core already has to encode ecological impact, but that's the kind of the best case scenario is that you have ecological impact. If you have other kinds of impact, then it's not so easy. So here's some other, I'm sure you guys could all come up with 100 examples of ecological impact of invasive species. But let me talk about a couple of other types of impact. One is geo or hydrological impact, where the invasive species is having some kind of effect on the geology or hydrology of the area. It turns out that hydrilla tends to clog canals and waterways and stuff. Typically people go out and science this problem. What do? They go out and they look and they document the presence or absence of hydrilla. Hey, this is here. Darwin Core works great for that. However, then they also need to take hydrology measurements. They need to measure flow rates and calculate expected flow rates and all of this stuff. Well, Darwin Core is horrible for this. There's nothing in Darwin Core for this. However, it turns out that there are existing standards for geological and hydrological data that are great for this type of data. You have a data point now that is great in Darwin Core. You have another data point that would be great in some other sort of standard. What would be nice is if we could link these two together. So do we want some kind of Darwin Core hydrology class? Well, no. But it would be really nice if the Darwin Core resource relationship could point us to that data set. It can have already this, the related resource ID that might, be a related resource of a hydrology data set. But where is that hydrology data, that data point at? Well, it's not able to be encoded here. And so you could probably imagine where this is going to go. Hydrilla also has a massive economic impact. It impedes recreational use of water bodies. How do we science this problem? Well, you go out and you document the presence or absence of hydrilla, and then you also have to compare expected and actual use of the water body for recreational fishing. Well, you're not going to believe this, or maybe you will, but NOAA actually has data standards for specifically this thing, for doing surveys and collecting data about recreational fishing. So what would be nice, not if Darwin Core had a recreational fishing class, but if Darwin Core could somehow point these data points, hey, we went out and we measured hydrilla But we measured this occurrence of hydrilla specifically in the context of a study dealing with hydrology, and there are associated data points where we measured the hydrology of the area in association with this occurrence of hydrilla. So, proposal is that it would be really nice if somehow we could expand, or if we could figure out a way to shoehorn in this stuff into the existing resource relationship, a URI to find the data set, where is this data set and the datum that is associated with a particular occurrence. And then also a URI to find information about the standard or the format that the related resource is in. Just enough to actually design and automate a join operation. We can get now the Darwin Core information, and from that we can go out and actually pull in and join it with the hydrology data or the economic data or the epidemiological data or what have you, or the ecological data also from, in Darwin Core format. Where do we find this data would be, I think, great. So that's about the end of my talk. Conclusions, organisms don't live in a vacuum separate from their environment. Anywhere, ever, at all. And so the interactions with their environment are actually sundry, and they're important for invasive species management. And so I think that it would be really great if we could somehow access, link, encode somehow this data with Darwin Core, or link to it, preferably, I think would be the obvious solution. Thank you very much. Have a nice day.
Okay, thank you, Scott, for your presentation. We have a few minutes left for questions, so I don't know if there's a question in the chat, or does anyone in the room have a question? Yes, please.
Thank you for your presentation. I love the idea of linking out to external resources. Thinking about it from a practical standpoint, working at the museum, when we're given Darwin Core data, we kind of take that in, we know exactly what to do with it. In terms of the long-term maintenance of that other data that is being linked to, if this is something that's done from a study, is it the authors of that paper that kind of maintain the recreational fishing data or the hydrology data? Is it something that the government would take on and then we linked there? And how do we make sure that when we pass on processes and data to future generations of people at our museum, that they know, hey, there's this data that is here that you also have to look after, et cetera?
Yeah, that's a great question. Definitely from my perspective, working with the federal government in the US, we have kind of strong directives to keep our data open and to make our data publicly available if we have it. We have a specific site that's like data.gov in the US where lots of people publish data, and we're able and encouraged to publish our data where it is hosted and maintained for long periods of time. And so, but everyone doesn't have that option, I suppose, to just host, especially academic researchers, to just host data in perpetuity in some kind of website somewhere. So I'm not entirely sure how to solve that problem for everyone everywhere, but it's a good point.
Okay, thank you, Scott. And with that, I would like to introduce our next speaker, who is joining us virtually, and I would like to welcome Tina Heger.
Hello, welcome to my presentation, Harmonizing Hypotheses in Invasion Biology. My name is Tina Heger, and I'm presenting this from Munich in Germany. So as probably all of you in this symposium already know, invasion biology is concerned with the question why species establish and spread outside of their native range, and why they sometimes even perform better in the invaded compared to the native range. And possible answers to these big questions are or have been presented often as major hypotheses. Of course, invasion biology also has doing a lot of research about management, and I know that this is one of the foci of this symposium, but in this presentation, I'll be talking more about the conceptual background and about the potential causes for species invasion, which is then can deliver the background for efficient management measures. So one of these hypotheses, the major hypotheses in invasion biology that I want to focus on with this presentation is the biotic resistance hypothesis. It posits that an ecosystem with high biodiversity is more resistant against non-native species than an ecosystem with lower biodiversity. So, for example, this golden rod in the foreground here of this picture you can see here is an invasive species in Europe, and it will more easily establish in a very species-poor ecosystem, as, for example, the spruce monoculture in the background, as compared to a forest that has a very high diversity. That's the hypothesis. So in invasion biology, what happens to these big ideas is that as soon as you want to do some empirical research and do, for example, an experiment, you have to kind of focus more. You cannot address this big idea with one experiment. And so what people do is they provide their own interpretations of these big ideas. And here is an example, a paper by Hooper and Dukes in 2010. And I brought you here two quotes. One is the following: species already in the community with similar functional traits to those of the invader should have the greatest competitive effect on invaders. And later, in a later section, they write, functional diversity influenced success of two different types of invading plants. So the question arises, what is the relationship between the general definition and these very specific statements? And the second question I want to address with this presentation is, how could such complex statements that be formalized to enhance interoperability and to enhance harmonization of scientific language? I'm reporting here results of a project which was called the ENAS project, and these results are already published. You can see the link down here. And what we did in this project was to take several steps towards formalization of these hypotheses. Step one was to think about how these natural language statements can be transformed into triplets. And step two was how can we then link these triplets to existing ontologies, for example. And the third step then is how to figure out or to formalize how the more specific statements are linked to the general ones. And we also did some natural language processing, developed some tools for applying natural language processing to also make the link to concrete publications, but this is not in the focus of this presentation here. So let's start with taking a closer look at steps 1 and step 2. And so coming back to the biotic resistance hypotheses, and also based on taking a look at many other of these big ideas, we figured that it is quite reasonable to kind of reformulate them as triplets in the form subject and object, and hypothesize relationship between these two. And specifically for the hypothesized relationships, we found that there are already existing controlled vocabularies that we can make use of. And here, for example, we use the super pattern ontology, which contains a list of relations. And for the biotic resistance hypothesis, I picked this one here, namely has larger value than. So reformulated as a triplet, it reads resistance against non-native species of ecosystems with high biodiversity has larger value than resistance against non-native species of ecosystems with low biodiversity. And this is, as you can see, a kind of a comparative formulation of the biotic resistance hypothesis. As a domain expert in this field, I know that there is a causal claim also that is kind of underlying this comparative formulation. And I can write this down in the following form. High biodiversity negatively affects invasion success. So this would be the causal variant of this biotic resistance hypothesis. So next, as I said, we try to figure out in which ways these general claims could be linked to more specific ones. So let's come back to the quote that I gave you earlier. And here in red, I highlighted some indicators that we used for clarifying which kind of hypotheses it is. We say the authors were interested in a causal relationship, and also which kind of steps they took to towards specification of this general claim. And we found out, taking a look at more of these examples, that there are basically three ways in which the link can be made between the general claim and the more specific one. The first is what we call a decomposition. So this would mean adding building blocks to make assumptions that are about underlying causal relationships more explicit and also testable. And in this paper that I just showed you, what the authors did was to add this building block here. So the new claim now, which is more like a chain, reads high functional diversity causes strong competition between these species, and this then negatively affects invasion success. So this would be a decomposition. But the authors also did what we would like to call a specialization. They went from high biodiversity to high functional diversity. So they exchanged one of the building blocks with a more concrete version of this thing. And also, if you take a look at later sections of this paper, or the method section, for example, they did what we would like to call an operationalization. So they provided very concrete descriptions as to what exactly will be tested empirically. So to sum up, three ways how a specific claim can be linked to a general one. First, decomposition. Second, specialization. And the third one here, operationalization. So why do we think all this is relevant? I think to the audience of the symposium, it's probably quite obvious that taking these steps towards formalization are helpful in terms of enhancing machine interpretability of statements and thus enhancing interoperability, because it now becomes possible to annotate hypotheses in scientific publications. And we started doing that already and started modeling these hypotheses in Wikidata. And this way we can also make them searchable. And using Scholia, which builds on Wikidata, we can create visual summaries of these hypotheses or these statements. And also, we think it has strong benefits for research, also for ecological research, because it can help disambiguation and give guidance for researchers, because ecologists are not really used to asking these kind of questions or taking these steps towards formalizations. And we want to provide offer frameworks for enhancing efficiency of scientific workflows. And in order to do that, also what we did was to introduce a new publication format, which we called the hypothesis description papers. And in these, we suggest to include tables that report on these triplets, the general ones, as well as the more specific formulations that are out there, and also publish these statements as nano-publications, and then they become citable and findable and so on. So these are our suggestions towards harmonizing language for scientific hypotheses in invasion biology. And I'm very sad that I cannot contribute, not even online, because of the time zone differences. So please, if you have questions or are interested in further discussions, just contact me at t.hager@tum.de. Thank you very much for listening to my talk.
Okay, thank you for your presentation, Tina. I do think Tina is online because there was a misinterpretation of the time zones. So if anyone does have a question, please take your time. I think everything is very clear, Tina, because there are no questions.
Perfect.
Thank you very much for being there in the end. So I think we can proceed to the next speaker, which is Malin Strand, which is also a pre-recorded presentation.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, okay, thank you. And then I just share my presentation, Lien?
Yes, you can just share your screen.
Okay. Like that. And now you see my presentation, all right?
Yes, we see your presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'll just... yes. So I'm Malin Strand. I work with the Swedish Species Information Center. I'm a marine biologist. I have a research background in molecular systematics and taxonomy, so I don't work with managing alien species, but we've been involved with building a digital structure for data flow on alien species for the last 6-7 years within the Species Information Center. So that's my connection to being here. This is a picture of parts that are already in place and parts that we still lack. And since we are here for talking about the management actions, we are in this blue part of the picture. And here we have, I'll just do like this. We have to the left in the picture, we have observation reports, and that we've already discussed in other talks, occurrences, absence, presences. We have a solid system for handling those. And then we also have something that we can use to, we have a digital system to verify species identity and locality, and that's with experts. And then we also actually have a small alert system, so you can subscribe for certain species, so they, when someone reports one occurrence, it goes directly to the expert that could go and verify the species identification. So we have, to the left in the picture, we have come quite a long way. And then to the right, we have a catalog of methods that the management part uses. And then we have the question marks around the follow-up, measures, analysis, how to visualize before and after. And then we move on to things that should be following the reporting for national and international reports. So in the blue part, we have lots of challenges that already others have mentioned, but we bulleted them like this. It's a very variable timeline between first observation and possibly results. there are many different methods that change over time, and they may or may not be successful. There are different geographical and biological aspects that could also vary over time, also for one single case, of course. And then the large variability in formats and vocabulary. So for now, I just want to let you know what we've been working with in Sweden. And we start here. We have the regulation for the invasive alien species for the European Union, number 1143. There's a reporting period that all member states had to follow. And then in blue and yellow, there is a Swedish reflection for the regulation. And that one points out these two agencies, and they, from their responsibilities, point to these county administrative boards. We have 21 in Sweden, and they do the actual measures, and then they report. So 21 counties report back to these two agencies, and then the agencies report to the European Union again. So what has happened now, since we are getting closer to next reporting event, we've had a joint work between the county administrative boards and the Swedish EPA preparing for the next reporting round. So they've done a data product specification where they have specified their needs, reflecting their responsibilities within this full procedure. And they have started in the technical formats for reporting for the regulation. So they have now in their data product specification, they have used the exact vocabulary from the reporting format. So these numbers that you see here, they are taken as examples from the reporting format. And then there are different values below these. And then, of course, we reuse the other biogeographical regions and that coding system that is already in place for the European Union. With that said, we are hoping that this data product specification should take us a little bit further here within the measures and the follow-ups, and that we also can sort of reuse that for visualization. Was this measure successful or not? Did it make things better or did it make things worse? And then have that data in place for even the next reporting round. Sorry, I just have to. Sorry. Yes, so we are eagerly waiting to see the whole data product specification so we can see where we can meet with data exchange and who should keep what data and who should reflect whose data, considering the different responsibilities within the management section. So that was what I wanted to say now. And I also want to thank the EPAs, the Swedish Agency for Marine Water Management, and the CABs. So that was it from me.
Okay, thank you, Malin. Are there any questions from the room or from the chat? Maybe Malin, I have a question. If you can show me the graph again from the scheme you discussed in the beginning. that.
Yeah.
So if you go one back, I think, yeah, that one. So I see for management and methods, that's apparently one step in the chain you solved, I guess, or I'm not sure how to understand that. And
yeah, we have the authorities have a catalog of methods, with each method having a unique identifier.
okay, and
So
so you use that, and my question is also, I'm not sure if you know the answer, but do you also have contact with actual field managers using, or are they aware of this type of vocabulary? I'm just very curious if you interact with local managers with respect to vocabularies.
yes, we try to. So they are here, the 21 counties. They are the ones out in the field, and then they can have this subscription for their county on certain species. So if there's a report of an occurrence in their county, they can get that knowledge rapidly. And
Okay,
then they can and then the catalog of methods, that's between the agencies and the county administrative boards. So they are using the catalog of methods, but it's also under development.
Oh, okay. So it's a feedback between both parties, I would
Yes,
suppose.
exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Great. Thank you.
And then we try to figure out who should reflect whose data in terms of was this successful? Did we manage to delimit the area for this species? Or so these are unsolved questions, but we have a forum where we continuously discuss these things, where
Yeah. Okay.
also the CAB is involved.
Yeah, because it's my experience that the vocabularies should also be meaningful for the people working with it, with the managers. So I think it's important to have a feedback with those. So I'm happy to hear that. Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Okay. Thank you, Malin. I think we can proceed to the next question, which is presented by Nicole Hernandez.
Hi everyone, my name is Nicole Hernandez and I'm a biologist with the U.S. Geological Survey in Fort Collins, Colorado. And for my talk today, I'm going to give an overview of a project that I'm a part of and that is being led by the USGS in part of a larger effort to reduce the spread and impact of invasive species across the U.S. So this project is called SYREN, the National Early Detection and Rapid Response Information System. And simply explained, it is a web application that aims to improve access to information that exists for invasive species across the U.S. And because it's a web application, I just wanted to throw the slide in here to provide everyone with a screenshot so you all can get an idea of what this looks like. And right now, this is the version 1 website that is not currently live, but it's coming very soon. It's going to be launched publicly by the end of this month, September 2024. And so to dive a bit into the workflow of SYREN, starting at the bottom left with data collection, we know that there are multiple projects ongoing across the US that collect data on invasive species. And then the data from these projects then likely gets either saved to a local database or shared with a more popular data source like the Non-Indigenous Aquatic Species Database, or NASS, EDMAPS, or IMAP Invasives, which are a few popular examples here in the US. From there, the information from these sources will be shared with SYREN, where the information and data will exist in a centralized location. And in turn, SYREN will share the information that it receives from other data partners directly back to these data sources. Additionally, SYREN uses input and recommendations from its user group, which is its human network and the community of practice groups. And so that is how we are able to design the user experience and tool functionality to create and update the analysis and visualization capabilities of SYREN, as well as keep the informational needs up to date. And so overall, the purpose of SYREN is not to recreate what already exists, but to instead design a system that improves access to the wealth of information that's already out there. And the data that comes into SYREN from its partners, which are listed here, are from various geographical levels. And what I mean by that is we get data and information from counties, states, regions, and even from the national level. And so we really aim to highlight a wide array of the efforts and the work that's being done towards invasive species by doing this. So that is where we get our data from, but what does this information actually look like on SYREN? So currently we have more than 4,600,000 occurrence records from our data partners. And we also have multiple filtering capabilities for spatial data, as well as contextual map layers for data visualization purposes. And we will have a regional horizon scans dashboard that's customizable to the user. Under species resources, we will have tools and resources available for each individual invasive species on SYREN through the species pages. And we will also have risk assessments for over 2,000 species and habitat suitability models for over 200 invasive terrestrial plant species. And a couple other things is we will have a project portal where users can log in to communicate and collaborate with other users of the SYREN system across the US, as well as some information on the National EDRR framework. And this is something that I can't touch on too much today due to time, but essentially SYREN serves as the informational hub of this larger EDRR framework. And this framework is made up of many projects that are involved in EDRR to invasive species across the US. And finally, we will link to an eDNA Resource Manager's Toolbox, which is a great tool for early detection and eDNA resources to invasive species across the US as well. And so as I mentioned earlier, version 1 of SYREN is currently being reviewed and it's anticipated to launch by the end of this month. But quickly, I just want to give a shout out to how we got here. How did we make the decisions on what tools and resources and data to include on this web application? Well, we've had several community of practice groups over the last 1.5 years that have been instrumental in shaping the functionality of this version 1 application. And it was in those groups that we were able to hear the perspective of potential users of this system and to understand what's important to them and to see what they really want to get out of this web app. And from that, we have been able to create what is now version 1 of the SYREN web app, and we are really excited about how close we are to having its public launch this month. And so now I just want to give a brief demo with some screenshots to show one example of tool functionality in the SYREN web app. Due to time constraints, I'm only going to scratch the surface here, but I wanted to show all of the tools and resources that will be available in SYREN and highlight that this demo is only focusing on one portion of the data analysis and visualization capabilities. Okay, so first, at the SYREN homepage, we can drop down the Tools menu on the top left and select Species Pages. From there, we can type in a variety of species that we're interested in, but for today's purposes, I typed in zebra mussel and selected to go to its species resource page. From there, I am met with a photo carousel of zebra mussels on the right to be able to help me identify what they look like in the field, and on the left, the available resources for this species. So for today's purposes, I click on occurrence data, and that brings me to the SYREN mapping tool. And you can also see all of the aggregated points for observations for zebra mussels on the map. And on the left, you'll see some of the filtering options that you have as a user, and on the right, some of those contextual layers that I mentioned earlier for the map. Then if I click on a resource table, I met with the, again, the tools and resources that are available for this species that we saw on the species page, but this is another place to access that information. And we can see the number of occurrences that are on the map, as well as those tools here. Then when I click on the occurrence data tab, I'm met with the tabular data for each individual occurrence point, and I can individually go to the original source location for this information. So before I wrap up, I just want to emphasize the fact that this project is still in its first version, and we recognize that there is additional information out there that would greatly benefit early detection and rapid response to invasive species. And we also recognize that there is a gap in information related to data standards for invasive species impacts and management. So one of our goals with SYREN is to help figure out what that path forward looks like. And of course, in these and other conversations, we welcome feedback from practitioners of EDRR and to invasive species across the US. So if you're interested in reaching out or becoming a data partner, here is the contact information for Amy Agnew, who is our project coordinator, and for myself. And finally, here is the QR code that links to the sign-up page for our email list that will send information about our community practice group meetings. And again, our emails are listed here, so please feel free to reach out if you have any questions. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Nicole. I know Nicole is not here because it's the middle of the night in the US, but I know Scott is available, or he should be available for questions. So maybe, Scott, are you there?
I'm here.
Okay, great. Maybe I can start with a question for you. I was wondering, I don't know if you have any idea about the source data you receive, if you have any idea if these source data are all rather clean or messy, or you have any idea about the state of these source data that you aggregate into SYREN?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So right now, the various sources that we are pulling in are clean, but they are in bespoke formats. And so we actually have several ingestion pipelines basically for each of these partners that we currently have. And we would really love to, I know we're just getting started, but we would really love to move away from that because one of our partners, for example, is Montana, the state of Montana. And, there are 50 of these states in the US. And so supporting a bespoke, data format for each one of these is not feasible. And so we need to figure out something. And, using Darwin Core would be obviously great for that. This kind of leads into some of the reason why we're here and dealing with this management invasive species management task group is that it only handles some of this occurrence data. Actually, several of our partners have lots of data about how they're managing these things, but we kind of have been holding off on pulling some of this in because we need a springboard to kind of have a nice format to represent all of these things simultaneously.
Okay, thank you. I have another question, but maybe I just wait if there's a question from anyone in the room or online, but I don't
I think
see.
Malin has a hand raised.
Yeah, I was just wondering, Scott, is this a national project that will live for long? Where's the center of the project? Who is?
Yeah.
What?
Yes, it's a national project. It's currently got funding for for many years, so I think it's going to be long lived, and hopefully we will at some point have all of the various states' data. Because right now, basically, the invasive species data is all just completely fragmented among the 50 states. Some of the states actually contract out with university partners who have their own like kind of portal, and so some of the states are unified, but there are different competing products for this, and so it's a lot to bring together.
But do all of your states they have to consider this, or is it optional? Or
Yeah, it's kind of optional, and we have to negotiate with each of them to be like, hey,
okay,
you should give us your data. But it's kind of in their best interest, right? Because if something is invasive in North Carolina, then and not in South Carolina, well, South Carolina needs to know about it, and also in all of their neighboring states, And so I think we have a strong case to make here.
Okay, it's funny because I almost had exactly the same question. But I do still have one more question. Is in Siren, do you also have a subscription option for people to get alerts in their inbox when a new species is observed somewhere? Or yeah, how does that potentially work?
That's in the plan. There are lots of things planned, so it should be growing substantially like over the next several years. I think we've been working on it for like a year now, and so but it's supposed to cover a lot of different aspects of invasive species management. So this is definitely something that will exist.
Okay, thanks. Any more questions? Yes, please.
I'm wondering, the examples showed on the video, I saw you choose a species. I'm not very familiar with that species. Maybe it's an invasive species or not, I'm not sure. But I saw that species and you put the occurrences data on the map, and how you, I don't know how to work to get some early detection or rapid response. So, and I saw you have lots of functions. Maybe it's on your plan, I'm not sure. Maybe you can give some more examples of how does this system works. Thank you.
Yeah, so right now, most of the data and functionality that we have is just surrounding occurrences. And so you can basically, it works kind of like a lot of other, I don't have the system pulled up right now, or I would kind of poke through some stuff. But a lot of it is just like filtering occurrences down to, your location or, taxon or whatever of interest, and putting extra layers on top of that. So a lot of the functionality we have is just for mapping and searching, but it's pretty robust right now. And we've got data from a lot of these kind of people who partner with various states. And so we have a lot of data from all over the country, but it's, definitely better in some places than others. Like I think in Florida, we have as much data as like the entire rest of the Southeast, and probably then some. So sorry, I'm not entirely sure if that helped to answer your question.
I see a yes, so should be fine. Thank you, Scott. And no, I think, yeah, we can proceed to the last presentation, which is actually mine. I would almost forget I'm also presenting. So I'm going to switch to this microphone. I'm going to switch, okay, thank you. So my presentation is focusing on the new TDWG task group that we had just very recently kicked off. And I want to just talk you through the context a bit and what the future plans are with this task group. So this is a bit the idea of my presentation. I'm just going to give you some context. Why are we doing this? Then there's the backpack, which is the actual data we're taking with us. And then there's the road ahead, the plans we are actually making for this task group. So this is the context. When people think about alien species, some might think about these cute little creatures. But in my opinion, they're more like this, vicious little things. Well, or maybe objectively, they are plants or animals that have very negative impacts on biodiversity and on ecosystems. So, well, especially, I shouldn't say alien species, I should say invasive alien species. That's a very important distinction. So invasive alien species are really something we need to take care of because they have a big impact on natural ecosystems. And so people every day, especially in summer in Belgium, they go out in the fields and taking and removing these species from the ecosystems. And just to be clear, in most conferences, I need to explain what data standards are. So maybe I just might be clear what management is here in this room rather than focusing on the data standards. But for me, management is going out in the fields, removing something from the field with the goal to restore natural systems. Ideally, we all want to aggregate information from partner A and B, C, all together in one database, one system, so we can do some nice stuffs with it. We can build portals on top of it. We can have a broader view on what's happening. And this is, for instance, an example from one of the portals we developed for the Life Riparias project. This is an example of, it's just a screenshot from a map coming from our early warning tool, which is more or less the same as Siren, which was just shown by Nicole. But this here is focused really on occurrences only, so no management actions. And we wanted to do some cool stuff with management actions as well, but apparently there's just no way of standardized, well, there's no standardized way of sharing data. So we kind of try to map the situation for Belgium. It's not my goal to make you read this because first it's too small to read. But I just wanted to show you the complexity we're dealing in a very small country, Belgium. So I assume in bigger countries it might be even more complex. So there are different partners, different data share, different formats of data. Some want the data open, others don't want the data open. So there's like a huge diversity of partners, data types, data formats. So for us, yeah, it's quite a challenge to homogenize the data. And this is what we ideally want. We want to pack the data in an exchange format and share them between partners and have them published to a portal such as GBIF. So that's what brings me here. We don't think we need to reinvent the wheel. There is already a lot of available. So we hope to use the TDWG, the Darwin Core standard to get the data for management actions published. And for this, I zoom in on the data. So what are we working on exactly? And for this, we need use cases, which are very specific descriptions of a management action going on in the field with a specific temporal scope and a geographical and taxonomical scope. So for instance, this here as a use case that on the 7th of August 2021, John Doe from Natuur.VZW, which is an organization, observes an invaded area of 30 square meters of Himalayan balsam in a nature reserve called Doeveren. If you read this example, is quite simple if you think about it in terms of Darwin core mapping. It's just an occurrence core containing an event date, location, scientific name, organism quantity, type, and identified by. So 1 day later, his team of field managers removed 20 square meters of the same plant. So then it's becoming an event, a sampling event where we're speaking about two. So there's one parent event with two events, one event being the original observation of the species in the field, which we call here evaluation. And then in the second event, the managers go in the field and actually do something. So that's the action for us. And both are linked to an occurrence. So that's the same, well, it's actually the same event here, but let's just dive a little bit deeper into the details. So apparently they took them out by hand and it took them 7 hours to do the task. I think, okay, we could use sampling protocol for that and sampling effort. So we're quite fine. It's Darwin core can still cover everything. But maybe they also simultaneously, I don't know, maybe it doesn't happen, maybe it does, but they also use a crane. So it has a specific brand, a specific model, so more details about that. So you can lump it in the sampling protocol fields, but it's starting to become a little bit more messy. One other thing which adds to the problem is that there's just no way of standardized terminology to report about management actions. So if you compare all the different terms out there to that describe a management actions, you get a huge list. So if you want to share information with respect to management actions, yeah, well, then please go ahead, but it's a big job. So that's another problem, not only lumping the information together in the field, but also having a standardized vocabulary. Then maybe they also apply the herbicide to avoid regrowth. I don't know if they do that with impatiens, but it's just like a hypothetical example. So the list gets longer and longer and longer, and you also can use the measurement or facts extension, which is an option. But in my opinion, it's not the nicest way to represent the data in Darwin core. So I just touched upon the problem. I think we need to think about the Darwin core terms and vocabularies for management actions in the field. Materials, what about bycatch, eradication status, impacts. I also had a few discussions and heard that there are some issues with degrees of establishment means. So also the person, role, and organization. I'm just mentioning some things, and I still need to think about it very carefully. But these are just some ideas of me and other people in the task group that are, okay, what should we do about it? And some answers may be very simple, so don't shoot me if I'm presenting things that are very obvious to you, but for me there's still some questions left there. So the road ahead, we just started a task group about invasive alien species. About invasive species, for which I am the convener. But there are lots of people now trying to focus on this matter. And I also had a quick chat with Stan Bloom about the name of the group, because initially it was invasive species management, but he said, okay, maybe let's keep it more open. So at this point, it's invasive species. So anyone still struggling with some stuff, this is the moment just to come to me or anyone else of the task group with your questions, and maybe we can see where you can contribute to our work. So the road ahead at this point is that we want to gather use cases. We want to review these use cases and then bring a proposal to extend the Darwin core standards. And as a last step in the line, which probably will take us some time will be to apply the extensions to the Darwin Core Standard. But so if I say extend Darwin Core Standard, this might be just a vocabulary, this might be few new terms, maybe even an extension, I don't know. I think future will tell. I'm not sure if that is how you say it, but anyway, the first step is we want to gather use cases. And for this, we need help because, especially when we're talking about management actions, lots of people in the task group are no field managers. So we really need input from people taking care of the data and knowing the data. And only in this way, by assembling all the information we have, we can do useful things. So this is really a call for help to make the best out of the task group. So I just want to conclude. I see a typo there. Anyway, so interoperable invasive alien species data is crucial to facilitate management, research, and policy. There's no current, there's no sufficient data exchange format available. And this new task group is focusing on the development of new terms, vocabularies, and or maybe an extension. And with that, I would like to thank you for your presentation in this very last presentation of today. Thank you. So if anyone's awake for questions, please go ahead. I won't shoot you if you're too tired.
It's more a comment than a question, and I think you probably already know, because I see John Vischorik is in the task group anyway. But this will be very interesting for the new GBIF data model work. It will be great to have use cases, also for Scott's work, to check we've got everything covered. I'm not sure we have.
Yeah, that would certainly be great. John didn't mention it yet, but I assume he thought about it, and he also gave some feedback on our very earliest use cases we started on. So yeah, for sure. Okay, if there's no more questions, then I would like to thank you for your presence and your attention, and I would like to thank the speakers for their presentation as well, and Donna for her input. Thank you very much.